Good evening and welcome again to Globespan 24/7, our Monday evening program. I want to welcome all our viewers at home and abroad to this very, very important discussion tonight. Tonight, as we complete the cycle of governance that now that we have in place the PPP administration that is duly elected, we want to move away from the political scene and talk about economics. Top of that list is the role of the oil and gas industry. Guyana is now a big player in the world market. We have oil and gas, and we have it in great quantity. Tonight, to carry us through is no stranger to us. We have with us Dr. John Mangal. He has been one of Guyana's leading person in that industry around the world. And we are so proud that Guyana has a son like him who worked in the industry and who is very knowledgeable in that sector. So I think tonight there's a lot of questions that we want to ask Dr. Mangal. And some of people we'll expect some call in to also ask Dr. Mangal some question. But to help me tonight, in addition to talking about the local content in the oil and gas sector in Guyana, is Mr. Nicholas Bayer. He's no stranger to us. He is the general manager for the National Hardware in Guyana, and he's also in the business community part of that business sector. So we want to thank all our viewers for being with us. We want to thank Nohar Singh for giving us this platform, and of course, Devin, our specialist, for carrying us through this program. Gentlemen, Dr. Mangal, Nick, welcome to the program tonight.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Dr. Mangal, before we get into the details of the oil and gas, for the benefit of our viewers, can you tell us exactly what your qualification and your experience is within this oil and gas industry?
Okay. Thank you, Charles, for me on, and to be on with you, Nick. So my name is Jan Mangal, and probably my first foray into oil and gas was during my undergraduate course at Edinburgh University in Scotland, where I was sponsored by the Society for Underwater Technology. I was probably one of the first set of students to be sponsored by them. And they're one of the main kind of industry bodies in the UK, mainly technical and also policy. So I got interested in oil and gas in my undergraduate, and I worked offshore as well in the North Sea. During that time, mainly as a deckhand, just to get some money during the summer. And then when I finished Edinburgh, I went to Oxford to do a PhD. And my PhD was in oil and gas. I was looking at the foundations of platforms in a Norwegian sector. So we were doing experiments on a new type of foundation, which platforms would sit on in the sea. So then, in terms of that's my education. In terms of industry, my oil and gas work was mainly with Chevron. Chevron is a large oil and gas company, similar to Exxon, not a major oil and gas company. I worked in Houston for 7 years with Chevron. 3 different jobs. Then I went overseas, mainly Asia, but I also worked West Africa. So what did I do at Chevron? I was an internal expert in Chevron for offshore foundations, mainly for floating systems around the world. That took me to Angola, some work in Angola. Then I went to a Nigerian project where I was civil structural discipline lead for a refinery. We were building a refinery in the Niger Delta. And that started as a $1.9 billion project, but ended up years after I left as a $10 billion project. So it shows how these projects, have huge overruns. But after that Nigerian refinery project, Then I went into the internal kind of head office of Chevron. I became really interested in investment analysis and decision analysis and economics. And so I was on a group in kind of head office of Chevron where we looked at all the projects around the world and looked at their economics. Should we invest? Because like Exxon and Guyana, they can't invest in all of their projects around the world. They prioritize the top best projects and then fund those. So that's kind of what I was doing in my third job at Chevron. Then I went to Vietnam for a gas project where we were going to gas offshore, build a 600-kilometer pipeline, and also build a power plant. And I was in charge of all the local stuff in the country, all the infrastructure, shore base, because for Chevron, we were going into Vietnam for the first time, so we had nothing. So I had to build a port. I had to set up the warehouses. I had to organize all the vessels, the marine work, the aviation as well, the helicopter. Then after that, I went to the Philippines where I was project manager for an existing asset. So an asset that was already producing gas into the Philippines. And that was a critical asset for the Philippines. It provided about 40% of the electricity to the island of Luzon, which I think has like tens of millions, probably 40 or 60 million. There I was a project manager for direct responsibility for 500 million for a new platform and 2 new deep water wells. And we did some really interesting local content things there. We actually built the platform, in the Philippines. No one had ever built a platform in the Philippines, but we decided we're going to build our platform in the Philippines. So we actually took a shipyard, not an oil and gas facility, shipyard, and with the contractor, upgraded it to an oil and gas facility. We trained 4,000 workers. We invest heavily in that facility, but we were successful. We built that platform on budget, on time, and with an excellent safety record. So that was my last project with Chevron. Then I wanted to do something different. So and Guyana had found oil around the same time, 2016. Well, it found it in 2015. So I ended up advising President Granger formally started in March of 2017. And I did that for 13 months, and that ended in the end of March 2018. At that point, I decided, my decision, what do I do? Do I work in industry? As a Guyanese with very, good oil and gas experience and also the president's advisor, former advisor, I could easily have found a job in industry in Guyana. But the problem is, when I looked around, I saw no one pushing the agenda that I felt needed to be pushed. So I decided to take 2 years out of my career. This is mainly unpaid the last 2 years, just to push issues and bring issues and to try and push what I see as a positive agenda for Guyana. Now, the 2 years were up in April, just gone. So I've been looking for work and I'm exploring other opportunities. So yeah, that's kind of summarizes what I've been doing. I can't hear you, Charles.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that you're one of the top qualified persons in this industry. Are there other Guyanese who have the same, similar, or more experience than you have within this sector that you know of?
So there are different types of experience. There are people who work for oil companies, and then some of them work for the smaller companies, the bigger companies. I work for the bigger companies. Then there are people who work for the service companies like Schlumberger, Halliburton, and stuff like that. So there are different types of experience. But so it depends on where that experience is applicable. To be involved in government in Guyana, to be understanding what government should do, you really need the experience from the oil majors. Like ideally, we need people who work for Shell, Exxon, Chevron, all the big companies, and worked around the world and all associated with governments in those jobs. So they know when they come to work for Guyana on the other side of the fence, they know exactly what the oil companies are thinking. So I haven't come across, I mean, I've come across people who work for the service companies, some who work for the oil companies, but, you know, there's various types of experience out there.
Okay, and we really want to talk about the PAYARA project, but before we do that, I want to ask you, Dr. Mangal, the Liza 1 and 2, did we have a good contract for the benefit of Guyana?
Yeah, so the contract is not actually for Liza 1 or 2 or PAYARA, the contract is for the Stabroek Block. So the contract is for the whole block. And the problem is it's a huge block. You know, it's unusually huge. And that kind of makes it more difficult for Guyana. So on that Stabroek Block contract, we did not sign a good deal. It's atrocious. It's actually, you know, people in the industry and then people who know about oil and gas, they're amazed by it. It looks like something out of the 1970s. You know, obviously Exxon will say it's a great contract. You know, those who are benefiting from it will say it's a great contract. But independent people will criticize that contract. It's not a good contract.
Can we negotiate any part of that contract? As a matter of fact, right now, as we speak, there is the OGGN group that is spearheading a signature campaign to send to the government of Guyana to even the PAYARA contract to renegotiate the production agreement for Liza 1 and 2. In your professional judgment, what part of that production agreement that we have signed, that Mr. Trotman signed, can be renegotiated for the benefit of Guyanese?
Yeah, so, you know, what are the reasons for renegotiation? You know, first of all, it's the commercial terms. You know, we are losing out tremendously on, say, the royalty. It's 2% or less than 2%. It should be more like 10 to 15%, 20%. We're not, Exxon does not pay tax. We're paying tax to Exxon. So overall, the contract is very much against Guyana and totally in favor of Exxon. So they're the terms of the contract. The other thing we need to look at is the situation in which that contract was signed. You know, I believe President Granger didn't even know the contract was signed and so my understanding is it was like secret. It was kind of hidden. And you have to recall that when people were asking, and I was asking back in 2017 about the contract, they were pretending, oh, there's no new contract. We just tweaked some things in the old contract. You know, we just tweaked. I think Trotman, you can say it. You can probably find Trotman saying that in the paper somewhere that they tweaked it. Well, no, it's a completely new contract, and the old contract had actually expired. So Guyana was in an extremely strong position because Exxon had already drilled a well, and the contract had expired. So Guyana had all the leverage, all the power in 2016. But the government secretly went and renegotiated and rushed to do a new contract. And I found out about it in 2017. When I started advising the president, I did not know there was a new contract. You know, the president, my terms of what I would do with the president, you know, I specified I will push for a new contract. You know, I will help with the renegotiation. So when I started, and Exxon told me, you know, we already have the contract signed. That was a shock to me and a shock to the president as well. So it's not only, you know, the financial part of the contract, it's also the situation and the conditions in which that contract was signed. You know, Chris Ram would probably tell you there are strong legal grounds to go and challenge that contract.
Nick, I know your part as we talk about local content in your area, but do you have a question? I have a lot of questions with Dr. Mangal, but I want to bring you in. Do you have a question with Dr. Mangal so we can, as we move on?
I mean, Charles, what I would say is, you know, given the context of what Dr. Mangal just said, leading up to how we found out about the contract, the 2016 renegotiated contract, what is his opinion if he were advising the president today? What, in his opinion, should we do at this point?
Okay.
Good
So it's
question.
quite similar to what I advised the previous administration. When I joined, they were working on LISA 1. And then that got approved. And they did an awful job reviewing the FDP, the Field Development Plan. But anyway, they went and approved it. After that, I told them, do not approve LISA 2. We need, we're going to get some oil from LISA 1. Are we going to get work? Are we going to get, let's stop now and focus on LISA 2 and use it as leverage. Because that's the only leverage we have against Exxon. Use LISA 2 approval as leverage to get a better deal from Exxon. Well, they didn't listen to me. So then they went and approved LISA 2. Again, they didn't really review the field development plan or anything. Now the new administration has PAYARA. Luckily, the last administration didn't go and rush on PAYARA just before the election. So the new administration has a great opportunity before it. The new administration has the ability to use the approval as PAYARA as leverage to get a better deal for Guyana.
And I think what you're saying essentially is that maybe the political cycles are negatively impacting how we manage the industry or the growing industry that we now have. Because I rather suspect that governments are under pressure every 5 years. They want to deliver in time for the next election. So for them, they may be looking at the production figures as the motivator. Whereas, as a businessman, we're going to look at the bottom line, which is what is it we're taking from each barrel lifted. So it's a question of, given what you just said, should we create a regime that insulates this industry from the political cycles?
Absolutely. And my presentation to Cabinet, when I started advising Granger in 2017, that is exactly what I said. We need to isolate and insulate this industry from politics. Politicians think 5 years. They can't think beyond 5 years. Nothing wrong with that. This industry, I ran the economics for these projects in Chevron. We run economics for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. And, we have the lessons learned out there. Colombia, Mexico, they used to have politicians running everything. And their production started to go down. Look at Venezuela. Yeah. So you can't run this type of industry with politicians. You got to set up kind of multi-stakeholder independent groups. And of course, you can have a couple of politicians there. But the politicians cannot be the ultimate decision makers. And that's the problem I had with the Petroleum Commission bill. One of my focus items as well, Granger, was stopping that Petroleum Commission bill. And Nick, you may have been in, I don't know if you were in the PSC or one of those organizations back then, but they commented on the Petroleum Commission bill, all the stakeholders in Guyana, and all the comments were the same. Highly critical of the Petroleum Commission bill back because it made the time it all power, and you don't want a politician having that power. So we have to insulate the industry from the politicians. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Do you see this government setting up that oil and gas commission, putting professionals with sectoral experience to be the guiding persons along the way? I mean, do you see that happening?
We were all very hopeful. We went through a lot with Reagan, the 5 months of Reagan, and we are all really, hopeful that this is, we're going to see some change. But, I think we have to accept this is Guyana, and It's still early days yet. It's only a couple of weeks. But for this government to do the right thing, they have to behave in a very different way than they usually behave. It's not about party, it's about country. It's not about 5 years, it's about years. So it takes a complete shift in mindset. And I don't know if they recognize that or if they have, they're prepared to do that.
One of the things, Doc, we hear about a lot is that the type of oil that we have in Guyana, the carbons under the sea, we hear a lot of sweet, light, and heavy oil. Explain to us what is light sweet oil, and what is the heavy oil, and which industry uses those oils?
Okay. So you think of it in terms of viscosity, like the difference between water and honey, or water and tar. Some of the stuff, heavy oil, is like tar. The stuff they're pulling out in Venezuela. Venezuela is mainly heavy oil onshore in the Orinoco, and some of that stuff is like tar. So heavy oil is like honey, tar. Sweet oil is more like, the oil you would put in your hair, or baby oil, or, some of it like diesel, some of it's up like diesel, the sweet, light type of oil. So it's mainly viscosity. So how does that work in terms of market and opportunities for Guyana? So this oil we have, this sweet light oil, requires very little processing. So that's a good thing, because then the cost, will be less for the end user. And also, I don't believe it has many pollutants like, CO2 and other things. So that really helps. I mean, places like Venezuela with the heavy oil, they managed to sell their oil because over decades, the special refineries have been set up that can deal with the heavy oil. But it's tough. It's difficult to deal with heavy oil. The light oil that we have is much, much easier to deal with and much more marketable.
So we're in a better position than most oil-producing countries because we have the best oil out there, basically.
Well, Nigeria has very good oil as well. I'm sure Angola has good oil. So the thing about the oil industry, and which makes a success or a failure, is people. It's not the oil itself. It's getting the right people and looking long term and having the right policies and rules and regulations. And it's really the people that will make or break whether we can succeed with this oil or not.
And that's a really good point. Nick, before you come in, I think, and that's the problem we have with our politicians. The PNC, they took over the entire sector and they had no experience whatsoever. I don't know, the PEP is relatively new now. They're only 2-3 weeks old. But it seems that the direction they're going is that the office of the president will have control over the oil and gas sector. And that seems to me, in what you're saying there, and Mahendra, who is also one of our brilliant sons of Guyana, he's saying the right thing. The oil and gas sector has to be apolitical. If this government make it a political issue and dominate the sector, Nick, maybe you can help us there. What do you see happening to the oil and gas sector if the politicians try to control it?
Well, so that's an interesting pretext there. I think what I saw is that they moved the Department of Energy back to the Ministry of Natural Resources, but they said clearly that they want the office of the president to have oversight and policy direction. But when so under our former president, who's now a minister, we had said that what we wanted to see was a petroleum commission set up that was relatively independent, reported back to Parliament, and allowed for you to move the management of the industry out of these 5-year cycles, which is why I kind of put that question to Dr. Mangal, because I figured that we kind of see the industry the same way. You see, as we mature, if you look these cycles where we had 20 years of power for one party, 20 years of power for the other party, they may start to shorten. So you can't build political architecture anymore where you're building it for when you're in power forever. So you have to build political architecture that is transparent, and you have to take this industry and put it in the highest degree of transparency that you can put it into. And therefore, creating a petroleum commission where you have a subject ministry and you have some amount of direction, but you include civil society and you include other persons who can bring independent views. So then you relieve the 5-year cycle pressures and allow the industry to truly develop and truly flourish as a national industry, so that you get policies, as Dr. Mangal was saying, that are not 5-year cycles, but 20 and 40-year cycles based on how the oil and gas industry sees it as well. So you get a more harmonious view. That then allows the politicians to be able to take harder stances, and it allows an independent. So, for instance, imagine a scenario if you had an independent petroleum commission negotiating on new blocks versus a political petroleum commission negotiating new blocks. Which one is subject to more external pressure, especially given that, in politics, you are going to be members of the international community, and then you're going to have large businesses who have influence. I know I lead a lobbying group. The Chamber of Commerce is a large lobbying group. We are able to bring in block. But when you have an independent regulator and an independent, let's say, independent management of the industry, they're not subject to the same pressures.
And Dr. Mangal, in your experience, follow up on Nick is saying there, which country or countries, oil producing countries, have independent oil and gas commission that overlook that operation? Can you identify any of those?
Yeah, well, before, I think, let me give you the background on the Department of Energy and the Petroleum Commission in Guyana. So, when I started in 2017, I never thought about the Department of Energy. The only reason we came up with that idea was because it was clear that nothing was happening in the Ministry of Natural Resources. They didn't hire a single oil and gas professional. And that was in 2017, 2018. So you're talking 3 years after first oil. They didn't want to do anything I kind of suggested. So the president and I agreed that, well, we need to set up a new entity where we could bring in the expertise from outside. So, and it shouldn't have been a department. It should have been a ministry. But President Granger he didn't want to create a ministry then, but he said at the next election, they'll transition into ministry. Because I wasn't happy with the Department of Energy right under the president. It shouldn't be that you don't want oil and gas under the president or in the office of the president. That's too much control. The US weren't happy. The UK weren't happy. The IDB, the World Bank, none of us were happy. But we kind of said, okay, well, it's just a temporary thing. And at the next election, it should transition into a ministry with parliamentary oversight. So then you can say, well, why not leave it in the Ministry of Natural Resources? Well, there's good reason for not leaving it in the Ministry of Natural Resources, even if you have a competent, run ministry. It's because oil and gas is so important to Guyana. Oil and gas cannot be handled properly in the Ministry of Natural Resources. Ministry of Natural Resources has gold, which is key to Guyana as well, timber, all of these other things. So there isn't really the ability or capacity to keep it in the Ministry of Natural Resources. And there's a lot of justification for having a centralized ministry for energy, which not only is oil and gas, but gas to power. We need to integrate electricity into that. Renewables will have to be integrated in some way into the overall power and electricity, system and grid. So there's a lot of opportunity with a Ministry of Energy. So I hope the new administration, goes that way. They've now said they're going to put it back in the natural resources, but I hope they set up a Ministry of Energy. On the Petroleum Commission, we need independent regulatory bodies. Kind of think, Petroleum Commission as a solution to everything. Well, it's not. First of all, we need an umbrella framework. We still don't have the umbrella oil and gas framework. We have that Petroleum Act, which is really old, and some other things which are really old. All of that needs to be updated. And so we need this umbrella that can handle oil and gas, and then these things which fit into it and under it, like the Petroleum Commission. And there'll be other bodies as well which are needed. It's not just the Petroleum Commission is not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet. We will need other independent kind of regulatory type bodies handling different aspects of the industry.
Yeah, Dr. Mangal, the question I was asking you, are there two questions.
Countries.
Yeah.
So I mentioned Colombia and Mexico, where they had their governments running the industry, and then they switched to more of a kind of independent commission. Let's see, I think most places, well-run places have, like the US, UK, Norway, there is independence there, technocrats. Now, they go under different names. It's not like Petroleum Commission. They will have different names, these bodies. But the thing is regulation. Regulating the production operations, regulating the award of contracts, regulating, the leases. So these are all parts of the regulatory environment and framework. And I think in most countries that are successful with oil and gas, you'll see that those bodies are usually somewhat independent or mostly independent.
I would like to add to what Dr. Mangal says that the thing you can see where there are some things that we needed to kind of grow up on about. For instance, the contract is very silent on natural gas. We are not sure in terms of what happens in the decommissioning phase. I think one of our members had talked to us. There's also no sort of depletion plan. So you can see that there are certain areas where there are gaps that the contractual language is not there, and we need to start having these conversations in terms of how do we fill these gaps? How do we add or amend language to fill these gaps? Because currently the contract is silent on these.
So that's where a renegotiation and a comprehensive renegotiation is needed. And, it's best to do these things early, not leave them to fester, because then it just becomes more difficult. This renegotiation should have happened a couple of years ago. Well, I hope that the new administration, does see it as a need. So the earlier the better. And, those items you mentioned, they're all critical. Natural gas is especially important because, I know natural gas well. A number of my projects were gas to power projects. I know countries push oil companies hard around the world to get that gas to shore. And it's easier for the oil companies just to burn it or push it back into the ground because gas is a hassle. It's difficult to get it to market, and the price is really low. But that's the view to all companies. But the view of the countries should be different, and is usually always different. I'm surprised by Guyana. But natural gas, the countries usually push for that gas to come to shore because you can do a lot of things with it. And, we could, for example, the approval of Liza 2. Before giving approval of Liza 2, the government should have said, and, I pushed Exxon. Exxon had a gas-to-power project when I was there. I had to threaten some of the ministers to get them on board with the gas project. And the way I did it, I wrote them an email, and I said, think of the next elections in 2020, and this was in 2017, I think late 2017 or even 2016, before I joined, but it's probably 2017. Think of the next elections in 2020 when the Guyanese people find out that you had an opportunity to bring gas to shore, that they could get cheap electricity, and you did nothing. And then the next week, I started seeing email, articles in the newspaper and stuff. But anyway, Exxon, I pushed Exxon, and we used to meet every week to discuss this gas project. Exxon was going to take FID, final investment decision, last 2019 summer. So if Exxon had followed the plan, or the government had followed the plan with Exxon, that project would be under construction now. So, there's just so much, so much we could do. And it's like the last 5 years, a lot of it just came to a standstill.
And I think Exxon played Guyana because Guyana was in this transition after the no confidence vote and everything else. So I think Exxon played us and they won. Flaring was part of my question to you. But Doc, we want to get into the PAYARA arrangement now. I saw today, Kaichur News, that you and Ms. Janki did some critical analysis of the consultant that the government brought in. And then the government, after they give one press release, they had to go and do another press release saying that there are others in this team. What is really going on? What is your opinion going on? And maybe Nick can join in there after Doc is finished.
Yes. The last administration completely screwed up the review of the field development plan for Liza 1 and Liza 2. And a field development plan is a critical piece of work that requires approval. So there are two things that the government needs to approve before these projects start construction. One is on the environmental side, the EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. And then the second document for approval is the FDP, which is the Field Development Plan. Now, the Field Development Plan specifies everything about what Exxon is going to do in Liza 1 or Liza 2. These are different projects. It specifies what equipment they're going to use, if there'll be a pipeline, how much they're going to flare, how often a tank's going to come by, what's going to happen when a storm happens, how long is it going to produce, what's going to happen to decommissioning. So it's highly technical and also commercial because it got in there as well. So field developments, I wrote field development plans for Chevron in Vietnam. I wrote kind of half the field. Well, I was in charge of writing the field development plans. I brought in all the experts in Chevron for the different area operations, floating production, pipelines, whatever. So I know field development plans well. And the Vietnamese government was tough, and it took us over a year to negotiate because they wanted their agenda in. And that's what Guyana should be doing. But the last government, they just didn't do any sort of proper review in the field development plan, the two of them, Liza 1 and Liza 2. They hired a company that had no experience of doing field development plans for the first one, Intex-C. Then they hired Bayphase, a company no one heard about, for the second one. And I think they're using Bayphase for this third one, PAYARA. No one heard about Bayphase. So we need to focus on these field development plans because that's the opportunity not only to get a new contract, but also to get a better project. Also to ensure that PAYARA, they're not screwing us on the cost. They're not inflating the cost. They're not gold plating everything. So we need to go in there and check the cost and review everything and make sure Exxon is not, there's a lot of tricks you can do. So I was very disappointed when I saw the announcement. VP Jagdeo said in a press conference, an individual was hired. So that got me, whoa, individual? You need to work our whole team. You need teams for this stuff. And then MNR put out an announcement, yes, an individual. So then I started, and then they named the individual. And then I knew of Alison Redford because I met her before in 2016 or 2017. She came, I was advising the president and provided her bio and everything. So I had all of that. So I knew about her. And she's not appropriate. She does not have the experience, first of all. And then she has this ethical issue around, when with misuse in public funds. So, you don't hire a politician to go and do a field development plan or oversee a field development plan. That's just completely ridiculous. So I was really disappointed when I saw the announcement that Ms. Redford was hired, because Guyana needs to realize we are the sexiest thing in the world now for oil and gas. We can hire who we want. We have money. Everyone in the world in oil and gas is looking to Guyana. We don't go and need to hire the B team or the C team. We should be hiring the A team. So the hiring of Ms. Redford, and I kind of think I know what's going on there, is really disappointing to me. You're muted there, Charles.
Nick, you want to make any comment there?
Yeah, I'll tell you, from my own little view, one of the fun parts is that your field development plans actually includes local content. In your field development plan, you must say what you plan to do for local content and how you plan to either build up skills or activities that you will need in executing that work. So without having very thorough lens on the field development plans, you can have all sorts of language that really sounds nice on paper but never gets implemented, and that language could mean loss of jobs, or let's put it as an opportunity cost of jobs. So it would be good to have the right people looking at that field development plans, and especially people who have an understanding and have looked at field development plans in other areas, so that they can compare and say, well, given where you are in the industry, and we've seen similar countries, and if in the field development plans there was X amount of expected local content, X amount of training, X amount of jobs created, and we think you are either on the money or you're selling yourself short, and then they make the recommendation.
Yep. And the problem, Doc, is are we doing the same thing that the prior administration did, this administration? Because they hire base side, as you mentioned, bay phase, whoever they are, they pay them almost, $400,000 to do an evaluation of contracts, and nobody seems to know what they have done. Now we have Ms. Redford coming in from this Canadian company. Well, I don't know, she was a former premier of one of the province. So are we getting anywhere, or are we just back to square one?
I think we're back to square one, but the excuse will be, Canada was really helped out Guyana, and as the UK and CARICOM as well. We can't forget CARICOM during the election rigging. However, these countries don't need a payback. They're not expecting a payback. These countries would just be happy for Guyana to be democratic and for Guyana to have a fair and level playing field for work, so that their companies can come and get work in Guyana. I think that's all these countries would like. So there's no need to go and, try and justify it by as a favor to Canada. Canada doesn't need no favors. They don't expect these favors. That's kind of like a misinterpretation somewhere in Guyana. But no, it's unfortunate because there's so many good firms out there, and we can hire the best. The price you mentioned for BFA is like 400 and something thousand US or 300 and something thousand. For the quotes that some of the quotes we saw for Liza 1, they were like 700,000, even a million. So it depends on the work, the thoroughness. This is not someone sitting down and reading a report. Reviewing the field development plan, you need your own simulation software. You need to actually go and simulate the reservoir. You need to simulate how that reservoir is going to produce over the life to see if 5 wells are justified or if it should be 3 wells. So there's a lot of work to be done in reviewing a field development plan. You got to do your own simulation. That subsurface simulation work is high-tech and expensive. And I doubt whether Ms. Redford and them are doing, and they don't have any experience doing that stuff, but we should be hiring a firm which has a track record of doing these field development plans, and also a track record doing them for countries like Guyana, and not just for all companies.
Nick, any question for Dr. Yan?
Well, I think one of the things I would ask him is that, in his experience, let's say in Chevron, who were some of the companies who reviewed those field development plans when he was in that section of Chevron, just so we can understand and have what a company who does this on a routine basis looks like. Okay.
So in Vietnam, the Vietnamese government did it themselves because they were experienced. They had the teams of people. Vietnam has an old oil and gas industry from the Soviet times. The Soviets really kicked off that industry in Vietnam. So they have a lot of highly skilled technical people. So they did it themselves. But look at Ghana, for instance. People make a lot of analogies between Ghana and Africa and Guyana in terms of oil and gas. So Ghana is probably about 10 years ahead of Guyana. And Tony Paul can brief you well on this because he worked there. But Guyana, they probably initially brought in some experts, but they probably had a core team in government at the time. So, but the companies there are numerous companies out there, even Schlumberger, Halliburton, and you probably don't know about, like Gaffney Klein, and even the likes of Woodmac and Rystad. But I wouldn't trust them because some of these companies make most of their money from Exxon. So they're not going to review a field development plan and then criticize Exxon because that's not going to help them. So we have to be careful about the companies we hire as well. Will there be any conflicts of interest with their other clients if their other clients are Exxon? So, now is the time for Guyana to slow down, get the right people in, do the right thing, and do it properly.
Dr. Mangal and Nick, we have a call on the line. So, call, are you there?
Hi, Charles. This is Darsh.
Hey, Darsh, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so I want to ask a question. So, last week the government announced that, they will have the Canadians help them do a review. And then on Friday, I think they said that review will be completed August the 24th. So I've seen Dr. Mangal in the papers, etc., talk about, a review should take at least several months, etc. So one question is, how can it be that short? Sort of a second part of that question, the government did mention, and it was in Stabroek News yesterday, about Bay Phase Oil being awarded a contract of $387,000 US in December 2019. I think this is the first time, at least following this oil conversation, I've heard of Bay Phase. I did go and check the Bay Phase website. No one is listed on their website. There's a phone number and there's a contact, and the website seems very, very basic. So I guess I want to figure out, was there any bidding process for this PAYARA review for Bay Phase, if anyone knows that? And how, if the Canadians, they were just hired last week, how are they going to take the Bay Phase report and consume that, and their lawyers and politicians consume that, and have the government produce, let's say, a final report on August the 24th? So I don't know if any of your panelists can answer that question.
Thanks, Darsh. Excellent question. So let's go to Dr. Mangal.
So in summary, Darsh, I believe this exercise with the Canadians is a rubber stamp, because there's no way anything can be done in a couple of weeks by the people who they've listed as well, by anyone. No one can do anything useful in a couple of weeks, especially the people who they've hired. Then you have to recognize you can't trust what Bay Phase did. Bay Phase, no one knows about Bay Phase. Kaichur News has written a lot about Bay Phase. We can't expose in some issues with them. So we can't assume, Bay Phase has done a thorough piece of work and then we're just now going to come and check it. No. You got to assume that that work is compromised and it's probably of extremely low quality. That's what you got to assume going in. So my worry is this exercise with the Canadians is purely a rubber stamp by the new administration to say, oh, we went and checked PAYARA, is okay, we can approve it quick and move on, without actually checking anything, without actually using PAYARA as leverage to get a better deal against Exxon. So that's my worry. You're muted, Charles.
I do that when you're on so I don't want to disturb if the government does not, or the government go ahead after this review done by the Canadians, and because of the pressure, and Kaichur News has been a really forefront in this discussion, and we got to give kudos to Kaichur, to Stabroek to a small extent. But if the government delays the approval of PAYARA, will the investor go somewhere else and invest their money? Because as we look around the world, the demand for oil, as we all are hearing, is kind of subsiding because we're going to renewable energy. What if we don't approve the PAYARA? What happened then with the investment? And then they live with the local content that Nick is talking about.
Myself or Nick?
You, Doc, and then Nick afterwards.
Yeah. So this is a narrative that was being pushed from the start, that Guyana needs to rush and produce its oil before the oil disappears. And that's, I believe, Exxon is behind pushing that narrative locally, that Guyana, don't worry with the new contract, don't worry, just take what you get and produce it quick because it's all going to go away anyway. And you know what? Exxon is telling their shareholders in New York City the exact opposite of that. They're telling their shareholders in New York, oil will be here forever. Please invest in us. As a company, we are not going away. We always need oil. So it's a clear contradiction and lie there being told. We don't have to worry about investors running away. This is a narrative that they spin all the time in countries like Guyana that, if you challenge us in the negotiation, we'll run away. No. Exxon is not the only oil company in the world. There are many others. If Exxon decides to walk away, we can find many other companies. But Exxon is going nowhere. Don't believe them. They'll say they're going, but they ain't going anywhere. Guyana, the amount of money Exxon is making in Guyana is Exxon's future. Exxon is completely dependent on Guyana. And even if we take that $55 billion back, Exxon is still going to be making a profit in Guyana to keep that company successful and going. So Exxon is not going anywhere. Let's not buy into that narrative that they're pushing.
So it's the art of fear causing us to, maybe that is what caused the previous administration to sign that contract. I don't know. I don't know if there's corruption involved. We don't know if it's fair. We don't know what happened. But I think this government also need to get down to the details of why that contract was signed in so much secrecy, knowing that Guyana could have demanded much more. I think your article, you're saying we could have got almost $1.5 billion in a signing bonus, maybe $1 billion. We end up with 18 million US dollars. So we have lost a lot. And that is something that we're hoping that this PAYARA contract will force Exxon. And what you said there, Dr. Mangal, is so right. Exxon is not going anywhere. They're only using those statements around the world, as you said, and to Guyanese say, hey, you better sign it or we are gone. Where are they going? When Guyana has one of the largest deposits for their future operation. And Nick, when we talk about the local content, here in America and most of the developed world, there are independent bodies who report on the authenticity of information. Here you have, whether it's the unemployment, whether it's the storage of gas, whether it's the housing permit, whatever it is, it's really independent of the government. The government knows about it, but they don't make that decision because, like we know up in China, they would fudge the numbers to whatever the occasion is. So Exxon is saying that for the local content, they have spent 10 million, 20 million, God knows how much. Who verified that is accurate?
Well, the thing is, Charles, is Exxon produces these reporting, and then they submit the reporting to the Department of Energy. Unfortunately for us, the information doesn't go anywhere after that. So what we get is what Exxon decides to self-release. So we're depending on them for the information. A more ideal situation would be, which going back to if we had some sort of an independent commission looking at this, you would then have those numbers going to the independent commission, and the independent commission could then release, and you can compare it with Exxon's self-release, and then you can do a third comparison if you have the independent commission doing things like researches and studies to compare across first the region and the world to see where we are and where we should be getting some local content. Because if you look at it, what you would expect is that as you go from 15 to 20, which is first production, you're seeing an ever increasing and growing amount of employment and local spend because you're building capacity. Now the question we have to ask is, what is the ideal rate that spend should be growing at? And what is the actual rate we're experiencing that spend is growing at? And that spend has two avenues outwards, right? In actual employees hired and goods and services procured. And if we don't ourselves have, going back to what Jan was saying in the FDPs, if you don't have your own reservoir analytics, so for us, if we don't even have our own analytics and economic modeling, how are we going to hold Exxon accountable? What are we holding them accountable to? It's good that they're doing their analysis and presenting their information. And, what we are depending on is Exxon to be a good model citizen. Now, it's great if they are, and so far, I'll say, I think they're doing a good job, but they can definitely grow further and go and do more. But we need to build our own capacity to hold them accountable. And unless we do that, we're in a weaker position.
Okay, gentlemen, we have someone on, and we'll ask, is Mike Prasad? Mike, go ahead.
Mike, yes. Hi, gentlemen. Good evening. I see Jan is in his car somewhere in Texas. Jan, are you on the road?
Yes, my daughter is doing piano, and she did not want to shift. So I moved to the car.
I'm very impressed with what you have been saying tonight. You have demonstrated knowledge of the oil business, and I'm surprised you were not on the next plane summoned to Georgetown after the new government took office. Anyway, I was just paying you a compliment here. That aside, listen, we were all delighted when President Ali put the PAYARA approval on hold, because we thought he was going to use that as a pressure point or for leverage to renegotiate the contract. But days passed, no details in the paper that suggest this would lead to renegotiation. So what is this PAYARA review all about? Well, I learned tonight listening to you, it's about reviewing the field plan. That is all about engineering. This has nothing to do with Guyana getting a fairer deal of the 2016 contract. So, where are we going with this field review plan, and what has become of the promises the government has made about renegotiation? I've been told in the papers, and many, many people have listened to the campaign throughout the country, they were all told by the speakers on the PVP campaign that this is going to lead to renegotiation. The speakers have promised explicitly to the people of Guyana that they are going to renegotiate the contract. What has become of that promise? Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Dr. Yan, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I suspect that the new government, that they were very keen to placate and make the U.S. especially friendly and happy prior to the election. And and I listened to the young chap, is it Ramson? The conference in Houston where he was here talking about oil and given the government's perspective. This was early last year. And he was very clear that the government is not going to renegotiate anything. The PPP at the time, the government is now. So I know President Ali may have said that they're going to look into it to renegotiate. And I think it will only happen if we keep the pressure on. Because the easy route for the government is to renegotiate. That is the default. That is easy to do. The more difficult thing for the government to do, and which is better for the country, is to renegotiate. So the government will take the path of least resistance unless they're forced somehow to take the other path. So, as I said, when I was the first Gov't official to criticize the contract, and I did that at UG, probably in late 2017, and Harman came out the same night with a press release saying, Jan Mangal does not talk for President Granger or the government, and of course I don't, as I did at the time. But they seem so sure that, someone in negotiation, but we need call-in. More people need to be call-in. More people need to be put in pressure, because the government will take part of least resistance. And I think for them, that is no renegotiation. And the way they'll justify it, they'll say, oh, well, let's just do this third one. And then the fourth one, we'll renegotiate on that. But that's not going to happen. And we don't need this third project in any rush. We have Liza 1, we got Liza 2. That's going to be over 300,000 barrels a day. That's much more than, that's such a huge injection to us and our economy. And there's no need to bump it up with PAYARA to 700 or whatever thousand barrels per day. So we should use PAYARA to get a better deal. The approval of PAYARA as leverage to get a better deal. But we got to pressure the government.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer, can I ask a follow-up there? Mr. Boyer, Does the government have anything to fear from asking for a renegotiation?
That's a tough question. I would say something. For me, we're in a position where we need to figure out what stance we want to take. And if we look at Vice President Jagdeo, I think he took a very he took a very coy stance. He said that they would look at renegotiating contracts such as Tullows, because I think Tullow had a very weird provision where it says that their royalty, or there's some fee in there that was reimbursable. But he said that they would kind of use the Exxon contract as the benchmark. Now, we need to kind of take a decision. If we are definitely not for this contract, and if the majority of the country says let's renegotiate, then we need to take a stance and say that we need to renegotiate. We need to stop the approvals of PAYARA, and then start the process to say, Exxon, look, basically a majority of Guyanese, because the government of Guyana represents Guyanese people, right? And so if a majority of Guyanese people say, we want to renegotiate this contract, we need to do it. If a majority of Guyanese people say that we want production figures and we want production now, well, boy, that's a tough position for us, because then they want the production at whatever take they can get. The thing is that for me as a businessman, I would tell you, as a business person, our objective is to get the most we can get out of our resources. And not, I guess what I would say is, having the advantage of not being in the oil industry previously, if I were put to negotiate this contract, I would recognize my inexperience in the industry, and I would have said that I just want a royalty off the top, so that all I have to do is measure your production figures and not guesstimate what your costs should be and have to go in and dig into your accounting and worry about profit splitting. I just want to take my royalties off the top. We can negotiate local content, yes, but then I'm just coming to say, hey, I attach my meters. I know how much oil you're lifting, and you pay me my percentage, and you move happily onto market.
And Nick, that is, I'm so sorry, Mike, but Nick, that is so easy to do, I guess. If we are getting 2% royalty and 12.5% profit, which end up with like 14.5%, why don't we get 12% royalty at the top? I mean, and then we can share 10%, 5% of the profit. That's fine, but let us get the top up first.
You see, to me, it's a psychological thing, because it's actually, we get 2% of gross and it's a 50-50 split of profit. But look, in business, we can adjust cost. We can adjust cost accounting. I don't want to play that game. I don't know, Exxon's true cost. They're going to submit their bills to me. I just don't want to play that game. I rather just know you've lifted 1,000 barrels. My percentage of that 1,000 barrels is X, and to get that X percentage, I would have looked at other countries, what they get as their take. Look at comparable grades of crude. You're measuring not just what the country takes, but what type of oil it's producing, and build a benchmark and say, well, based on that, I think we should be able to get this much in royalties from Exxon, and go and say, look, this is what we want. It's our resource. I need that to be able to deliver it to my people, and that's my negotiating position.
All right, Mike, thank you so much.
Charles, there's a very strong argument for a fixed percentage of revenues. The government is doing that, and many other countries have begun that. This is a very laborious process, and you will lose in the long run. However, my final point is, I think the of an ally government should begin by writing a simple letter, as I suggested in a letter published in the Cultural News a few days ago. Write a simple letter to ExxonMobil and tell them this is a very unfair contract. We want a fair contract. 14.5% for the foreseeable future years is a scandal. And writing a letter, and let's see how ExxonMobil reacts. Why is the government so afraid? That's my word, that's my characterization, based on how they're acting. They're afraid to ask for a renegotiation. And I wonder what could be the reason for their for the position this government has taken. It seems to me that in a short while, if they continue along this road, it would be obvious to the whole nation that they, like the previous government, are doing another sellout. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, go on.
I'd say one thing. Following on my answer, look, it's not an easy thing to be in the crosshairs when you're dealing with such a large company as Exxon. You have the considerations of being a small country. You have, kind of the Western Hemisphere has its sights set commercially on Guyana. What I would do if I were in that position, I would actually have gone out, taken a referendum, and just put it out there for the Guyanese population, because I would, rather than trying to say I'm unilaterally deciding policy, I would rather say, hey, let's put it to a referendum. Does the Guyanese people want to renegotiate the contract or not? And if the outcome of the referendum is yes, I've gotten my mandate to say, well, you know what? Guess what? This is what they've said. This is their choice. And me being the government that represents them, we will have to now sit down at the negotiating table and have some uncomfortable conversations. But I would want Exxon to understand that when I do something like that, it is never arbitrarily done or capriciously done. It is done to have a long-term view, so that once we get that renegotiation done, it's not every 5 years there's a renegotiation, or every 7 years, or every 2 years there's a renegotiation. I want them to understand what we want is a long-term contract where all of the people of Guyana are satisfied with it.
And that's such a good point you raised. There's just 1 second, Dan. But what can you do, Nick? You're in Guyana there, to force the government, because we know from experience, Exxon bribed their way through many countries around the world. And they have seen Guyana is ripe for taking bribe. That part seems to be part of our DNA. So they know the Guyanese they know the Guyanese politicians very well. And the thing is, if the PPP fall to the same trap as the previous administration, then we are really, really cooked, and the Guyanese people will forever, as someone says, will forever be with a begging bowl. Dan, you want to say something?
Yeah. So, this has always been my approach. For me, the big frame is Guyana is a test case to prove to the world that oil and gas can be done well. We don't have to end up like Nigeria or Venezuela next door, Trinidad. We started from scratch. We can do it well. We can do it differently. We can do it so it's sustainable, win-win for oil company and country. Right now, it is not a win-win. Right now, the contract is hugely lopsided in favor of the oil company. So for long-term sustainability, and this is what, my presentations to the former government, this is how I would kind of spin it. For long-term sustainability, we need to get to this win-win scenario and do it now. And once we get there, that's it. Done. We're not going back after Exxon all the time. You can actually, at that point, you can make the terms fixed by Parliament, that you need a 2/3 majority in Parliament to change the terms. And you could just have, say, one term that's flexible that you can negotiate on in the future. But you can fix most of the terms in Parliament to give, the investor community some confidence. But on the referendum, I would say that's going to be a bit, I see the point there, but You could see the situation in Guyana where the opposition are going to say, yes, renegotiation, because they know it's going to be tough for the government that's in power. And then the supporters of the government in power will say, no renegotiation, because, they don't want to make it tough for their government. So that's where the politics of Guyana might, play into that. So I wouldn't, the way these negotiations go, it's not the end of the world. After the negotiation, everybody's going to be smiling, best friends. But before, when you're doing the negotiation, it's going to be tough, and they're going to be a lot of, bad words and stuff. But afterwards, everybody will be happy. There's a lot of money on the table there, $55 billion. Exxon is waiting for Guyana to come. Are they going to give it up easy? No, they're going to fight. But we need to try and go and get that. And by one thing we need to do to try and get that is not approve PAYARA. That's the only leverage we have. It's not writing a letter to Exxon, and we need to do that, but you got to plan this out. Okay, we make the first move. What's Exxon going to do? Then what are the next moves? And you plan this out. And you have strategies, all different type of strategies for the renegotiation. And, you need people from the industry who've done this. People in the industry specialize doing this kind of thing.
And that's such a good point, Dr. Mangal. The thing is, if we rush, and your point is well taken. I know I spoke to a gentleman, over the weekend, and he was saying that, Guyana did not pay. Well, how much did Guyana pay to extract the oil? And that's not the point. The point is, it's our oil. You don't have to, as you said, you don't have to bring it up now. The oil will be there. This world will need oil for the next 100 years. With all this thing they're talking about, this renewable energy and everything else, yes, that will supplant some of the needs, but you need that fixated product, which is oil. So if this government do not do that, gentlemen, we're in more trouble than we are right now, because Exxon, I believe, Exxon knows that they have screwed Guyana. I believe Exxon knows that there, as you said, there is money on the table, but they will not give it up easy because, hey, the contract is already there. And I hope that Christopher Ram, as you said, and that Ms. Janki, I think, was also trying to get those things. We have a policy in Guyana. Here in the United States, before the USMCA came into being, Congress had to approve it. The deal with China, the Congress had to approve it. Our oil deal, the government signed it, Parliament did not sanction it. But we have precedent because the previous, this government, when they were in government before, they gave the Chinese almost 1 million hectares of land without going through Parliament as well. So we give contract before that Parliament did not approve. Do we have a case to take this to the court and says, this contract need to be null and void, which might be a far-fetched thing, because our Parliament did not approve of it?
So the legal situation with contracts with sovereign nations is a bit different than contracts between companies, company to company. So it's not like, going to court. I mean, the only court or body here would probably be arbitration, wherever that lies. This type of contract with a sovereign country like Guyana and a company is a real kind of high-stakes negotiation. It's like chess, and you got to plan out all your moves, and that's why approval of PAYARA is a key piece. And obviously, it helps to have some legal stuff, like the Chris Ram stuff, and all of that analysis on the contract, and the flaws and some illegalities as well. That everything gives you justification. And then just the fact that the contract is so lopsided as well is justification. So it's not as easy as, say, going to court.
Gentlemen, we have another person. He's being a fierce fight against this current arrangement. So, Doc, welcome on board.
Okay, thank you very much. So can I go ahead?
Yes, go right ahead, Doc.
Yeah. So I want to thank people like Dr. Mangal and Guyanese nationalists like him who would stand up for Guyana's interests. Also, Mr. Glenn Lal is a national hero. He has dedicated the resources of Culture News to make a good case why we have a bad contract and we need renegotiation. Global Witness today released a statement saying the Guyana government should renegotiate the contract. Now, I had gone back to Guyana and campaigned for the PPP on the big stage as well as on several television programs. And we told the people that the PNC sold us out, they signed a bad contract, it's hurting poor people, and we are a poor country. Up to last night, we had almost a national blackout. That's a sign of a poor country. People are poor, people are hungry. The doctors give you prescriptions to go get your own medicine. Right now, we have COVID problem. The children don't have computers. They don't have tablets. Ministry of Education cannot do online learning. So we have made a very compelling moral case. Culture News had done a lot of exposés. Global Witness has also. And so how do we get from the Canadian review and the Bay Phase review to renegotiation? The Oil and Gas Network folks, they have a petition online at change.org, and they're calling on the Guyanese people to ask the government of Guyana to do a renegotiation. So how does a Canadian review and Bay Phase review get us to renegotiation? They're not the same thing, right? Renegotiation is something that requires political will from the new government to say nothing is going to move until Exxon agrees to renegotiate. Is that how it's going to play out, Mr. Nicholas and Mr. Mangal?
Doc, you want to go on?
Yeah, but first, Charles, could you give me the name of the person who asked the question, please?
Doc, you want to say your name?
Terry J.L. from North Carolina.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the question. So, those reviews of the FDPs are those with Bay Phase and then the Canadians now, they're inconsequential. They're not, they don't really add any value. Those things actually need to be done again or done properly with the proper resources, the time, etc. So the connection between the review and using PAYARA, the approval of PAYARA as a bargaining chip is, they're two kind of separate things. So, you know, we could, there are many things we could use to justify not approving PAYARA. And, you know, the main thing would be the contract, just the terms of the contract, the unfair deal. Also, the circumstances around the signing of the contract, you know, the actual legality of it, that can be used. So we have many, you know, lots of ammunition as a country that we can use to say we're not approving PAYARA and we're going to, until we get a new contract and a better deal. So to answer your question simply, I don't think the connection, there isn't really a connection to the current reviews and the approval of PAYARA and using it to get a better deal.
We will renegotiate. We are asking for renegotiation, and the government is saying we are reviewing. We're not talking the same thing.
Doc, you know, we're not hearing you. You want to speak up?
Yeah, what I was saying, we are asking low power mode.
Yeah, go on. We're hearing you.
Okay. So we're asking for renegotiation. And the government say we're doing a review by this Canadian company. we're not on the same page. We need a government to say we are having this review and we are committed to renegotiating this contract.
And that's why, Doc, this petition that you have initiated with OGGN, it's online, and we're asking all our viewers to please go to OGGN website and sign that petition. It's on Facebook as well, so we can submit that to the government of Guyana, ask them to renegotiate this contract. It's really, really a bad contract. Nick, you want to come in there to Dr. Jerry question?
Charles, I think you froze a little bit to the end there. What I would say is that, you know, going back, if you are going to, you know, the government needs to decide that if they're going to make this something thorough and they're going to set their posture going forward, they need to set their strong posture early. Because as a negotiator, if you send weak signals up front, then you're going to be looked at as a weak negotiator. If you send strong signals up front, you're going to be looked at as a strong negotiator, and companies are going to adjust tactics up front, and so they understand your style. So the government has to decide what is its style going to be.
Thank you, Nick. Doc, we have to close off now, if you don't mind. Do you have anything else to ask? And then.
No, that's good. That's good. I like Mr. Meyer's suggestion about a referendum. That's powerful evidence to go to Exxon and say, look, our people are unhappy, we need to renegotiate, and our country needs it.
Thank you, Dr. Jailal. Dr. Mangal, if any Guyanese want to get involved in the oil and gas industry, in whichever area they're in, whether it's an engineer, whether it's geologist, whether it's an accountant, builders, whatever it is, supply, Nick and you also there, how can they go about getting involved within this industry that is called the oil and gas industry? What do they have to do?
So, Charles, I used to get this question all the time, and I have to back up a fair bit before I can answer that. And the jobs aren't actually in oil and gas. There will be few. There will be jobs, but there'll be few. And we don't want to give Guyanese youngsters and other people in Guyana false expectations. So the opportunity for Guyanese to work is not oil and gas. If we got a decent revenue, if we got that $55 billion back, what we are doing in effect is building a whole new country from scratch. Guyana is going to have to look like Singapore or something like that. We have to build a whole new country. So we need civil engineers, we need doctors, we need nurses, we need teachers, we need the business people. We need thousands and thousands and thousands of people that we don't have. We don't have enough people to build Guyana up to what it should be. So we're going to have to, Guyanese shouldn't be worried about jobs. With the natural gas, what I was pushing was set up an industrial zone close to where the gas will come ashore, and to build a deep water port, and then to have a route to Brazil on the backside, and to attract some Brazilian firms from Manaus. Each of those firms come up and they get cheap electricity. You're talking 10,000 people in one factory. So, and we get workers from all over the place. We shouldn't focus on the oil and gas jobs. The opportunity for Guyana is getting the revenue we deserve, the $55 billion, and building a whole new country, a spanking new country. When you walk along, you think behind Stabroek Market is a mess and stuff, and it's smelly and dirty. That should be like walking down the river walk in Singapore, with restaurants all the way, with nice boats and stuff, and families out, walking all the way from Stabroek all the way around by Pegasus and all the way. Maybe you're talking a whole new beautiful country where everyone is included, jobs, there'll just be too many jobs. So let's not focus on oil and gas. But I know for Nick, as a businessman, he has to focus on oil and gas, not a businessman, and we want Guyanese to be in oil and gas. And there are opportunities there. But I'm sure if we got the $55 billion, Nick would probably be branching into a lot of other industries than just oil and gas.
Doc, thank you so much. That was great, because as a question comes up all the time, do we have to go in the oil and gas industry? And the answer is really no. The other industries that will spring out of the revenue from that will create so much employment. Agriculture can be one of our biggest areas, because the world needs food. We can go back to become the breadbasket of the Caribbean and even here in North America. So thank you so much, Dr. Mangal. Nick, anything else in closing that you want to talk about?
Well, I think that in closing, we need to really push the conversation about local content more, because when you look at it, you will need some amount of services in country. With an offshore oil industry, it's like maintaining a city that's 120 miles in the ocean, and almost daily you have logistics going to that city. Right now, that city is consuming food, it produces waste. Do you know who's producing a lot of those services for that? Who's selling the food to these rigs? That's a city of almost 200 plus people, and they consume 3-4 meals a day. And then the waste that they're producing sometimes is hazardous waste. It in itself requires a certain set of services to dispose of it. So we need to be able to have an industry that is geared to maintaining the oil industry, or what I should say is we need to have an ecosystem of businesses that's geared to maintaining that industry. Where I like to tailor the comments for local content is, I'm not saying that I think Guyana should get into building FPSOs. That's not something we're going to do often. But we should definitely be able to supply food to the rigs. We should be able to definitely dock and repair those platform support vessels that are basically, the speedboats going back and out for carrying the various supplies to the rigs. These basic things are going to be constant features of the industry, and we need to be able to maintain those. And that's where we have to focus our local content efforts.
And this is so beautifully put. Imagine you marry both. You have that local content, plus the revenue we're earning from that will generate so much more in terms of opportunities for different industry, and Guyana will come out on top. And I hope, gentlemen, that the government of Guyana, someone will watch this program, will listen to the comments, and they will use PAYARA as an opportunity to renegotiate with Exxon, because Exxon knows, as I said, that they have taken away everything basically from this contract. As Dr. Mangal said, it's a lopsided contract, and we hope that we can correct that. Gentlemen, Dr. Mangal, I want to thank you for taking the time out this evening to be with us. Nick, we want to thank you so much for being with us. And we really want to continue this conversation because, as we said, in this program moving forward, we want to talk about the economic development of our country now. The politics is gone. We hope the politicians can work their differences out, but let us talk about bread and butter issue that will help Guyanese to come out from the morass that we're in. So again, we want to thank our viewers for watching, staying with us, to Nohar Singh and to Devin, and to all our viewers. Please, on Wednesday again, we meet on this channel. There is also a religious channel on Globespan 24/7. So if you're inclined to hear some religious part of your life, please tune into that. It's always 24-hour program. So to our viewers, to our guests, thank you so much, gentlemen. And God bless you all, and God bless our dear country of Guyana.
Thank you.